He laughed as he signed the divorce papers. Not a nervous laugh, not even cruel. It was the laughter of a man who thought he'd already won. The kind of laugh that says, "You never stood a chance." His name was Robert Fields, and to him, the courtroom was just another office. And this paperwork, just a final step in cutting dead weight. Karen sat across from him, calm, still, unreadable. But Robert didn't notice. He was too busy enjoying his victory. 10 years ago, they started with nothing but borrowed furniture and a dream. But Robert had taken that dream, polished it into a tech empire, and now he was cashing out, leaving her behind with nothing but memories and a cold legal agreement. Or so he thought. He clicked the pen, signed his name with flair, and leaned back like a man sealing his dominance. That prenup in his hands, ironclad in his eyes, crafted to leave Karen with nothing but her maiden name and maybe an old blender. But then Judge Halverson did something Robert hadn't expected. He lifted the document to the light, squinted, then uttered 5 words that shattered the illusion. "This document is not valid." The air shifted. Robert blinked once, slowly. The smirk began to fade, but he caught himself. No one else reacted. Not yet. It was as if the universe paused, as if even time needed a second to digest what had just been said. The prenup wasn't valid. What do you think happens when the predator becomes the prey? Before we dive into this shocking courtroom unraveling, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. And if you enjoy stories where justice hits like a freight train, subscribe now and turn on notifications. You won't want to miss what comes next. He didn't speak right away. Robert's eyes flicked to the judge, then down to the paper in his hands, as if it might magically rewrite itself. This was supposed to be simple. He'd walk out free, rich and unburdened. Karen would walk out with scraps and silence. That was the plan. But now the silence belonged to him. Judge Halverson didn't elaborate. He just held the prenup a second longer, before placing it gently on the bench like it was a useless receipt. Robert's attorney, Martin Levin, leaned in with a forced calm, whispering something that didn't seem to land. Robert didn't nod. He just kept blinking, like a man realizing the brakes were gone after the car had already started rolling downhill. Across the room, Karen hadn't moved. Her hands were still folded on the table, but her lawyer Tamika Monroe stood slowly, composed. She began to speak, not loudly, but clearly, drawing a line between the myth Robert believed and the truth the court was about to hear. Karen had been invisible in Robert's story, a background character, uncredited, unacknowledged, but Tamika brought receipts, literally email chains, bank transfers, voice memos, evidence that showed Karen wasn't just present during the rise of Field Solutions, she was foundational. The court leaned in. Tamika walked them through every step of the business's birth, how Karen used her savings to fund their first shipment, how she handled payroll and vendors when there was no one else, how her name was omitted from contracts she had helped write. Every detail Robert had overlooked, every piece of proof he thought would stay buried, was now center stage. And Robert, he stopped smiling. Up first his knee bounced, then his fingers twitched on the table. By the time the spreadsheet appeared, the one Karen had built during those sleepless nights, Robert had stopped making eye contact with anyone, especially her. Tamika's voice was unwavering, calm, controlled, but underneath it was a slow, deliberate fire, the kind that burns through lies. She wasn't just defending Karen, she was restoring her presence in a story that had tried to erase her. Then came the real crack in Robert's armor. Tamika pulled out the county clerk's certified receipt. She laid it flat before the judge and said with quiet force, "This prenuptial agreement was never filed. Not in 2011. Not in 2014. Not ever." A hush fell across the room. The document Robert thought was bulletproof, the one he'd clung to for security, wasn't just flawed, it was legally non-existent. The silence wasn't empty anymore. It was heavy, weighted with realization. Karen still hadn't said a word. Judge Halverson adjusted his glasses, holding the clerk's letter like a final piece of a puzzle. Then he looked straight at Robert and said, "There is no record. Not from any year. This agreement is not enforceable." And just like that, Robert's smirk vanished completely. Before we continue with what Karen did next, and how she turned the courtroom into a reckoning, don't forget to subscribe to this channel for more true story breakdowns that challenge what we expect from justice. And if this twist caught you off guard, let us know in the comments below. Would you have trusted the prenup? What happens next will leave you speechless. A kafam. Long before the courtroom, before the suits, the silence and the lawyers, there was just Karen and Robert. Two kids in Brooklyn with second-hand furniture, broken dreams taped together with love, and a belief that the future was theirs to build. He had charm, a dreamer, always scheming, always one plan away from greatness. She had grounding, logic, loyalty. She balanced his chaos with realism and steadiness. They moved into a tiny one-bedroom in Crown Heights. No elevator, no AC, just ambition, and a used coffee maker that coughed more than it brewed. Robert talked about building a legacy. Karen listened through overdue rent, late-night ramen dinners, and constant what-ifs. He launched the company from their floor. She typed up proposals. She made investor lists. She taught herself business finance by watching YouTube videos and reading accounting blogs so she could be useful. She believed that if they succeeded, they would succeed together. But Robert's definition of together was different. When he called himself the sole founder, she didn't protest. When her name didn't appear on the LLC, she let it. When he told her, "It'll just complicate taxes, babe," she nodded, because she believed in the we, not the me. By the time Field Solutions started turning real profits, Karen was still writing emails for Robert to send under his name, still managing receipts, still acting as secretary, financial assistant, emotional coach, and invisible partner. She passed on grad school, declined a publishing job in Chicago. She poured everything into a company that never gave her credit, and now the courtroom was her stage. When Robert stopped copying her on emails, Karen didn't complain. When the meetings moved from their living room to an office she didn't have keys to, she told herself it was growth. When he stopped asking her opinion, she assumed he was just stressed. But the silence grew loud. He began coming home later, answering questions with half sentences, brushing off concerns with cold smiles. The man who once whispered dreams across a chipped kitchen table now treated her like an employee on probation. Still, she stayed, because she believed her moment would come. That one day he'd remember who stood beside him when all he had was a busted laptop and a rented Wi-Fi signal. Then came the envelope. Thick, official, delivered by a courier who wouldn't meet her eyes. Inside, divorce papers and the prenup she barely remembered signing. No warning, no conversation, just a legal end to the life she helped build. Brooklyn family court wasn't glamorous. The walls were beige and chipped, buzzing under fluorescent lights. But that day, it became the site of a reckoning. Robert entered like a man heading into a business deal. Navy suit, confident stride, cologne she bought him years ago still clinging to his skin like a ghost. His attorney, Martin Levin, exuded smug efficiency. Karen walked in differently. No theatrics, no vengeance in her eyes, just quiet dignity. Her lawyer Tamika Monroe walked beside her like a shield. They said nothing. They didn't need to. But from the moment the case was called, Fields versus Fields, Karen's silence became a statement. Martin Levin stood with a swagger that only comes from years of courtroom win. "Your Honor," he began smoothly, "we're here to finalize the dissolution of marriage between Mr. Robert Fields and Mrs. Karen Fields. The prenuptial agreement, signed by both parties, clearly outlines the division of property. We request enforcement of its terms, which award all assets to Ms. Fields." Karen swallowed hard, but she didn't flinch. Tamika, seated beside her, gently tapped her arm. A reminder, you are not alone. Then Tamika stood. No theatrics, no raised voice, just precision and power. "Your Honor," she said, "we challenge the validity of this prenuptial agreement. The document lacks notarization. There is no witness signature, and most importantly, we have a certified statement from the county clerk confirming it was never filed. This agreement is not enforceable, not by law, not by any standard." A beat of silence followed. Even the bailiff stood a little straighter. Martin chuckled dryly, flipping through his folder. "Intent is clear. Both parties signed it." Mrs. Fields knew what she was agreeing to, but Tamika didn't move. "Intent," she said, "does not override the law." The judge listened in silence, flipping through the pages himself. Karen remembered signing it at their kitchen table. Robert had handed her the document with a smile and said, This is just to keep things simple. You trust me. She had. Now that simplicity was unraveling the empire he built on her back. The judge didn't respond immediately. He didn't question Tamika's words. He didn't argue with Levin. Instead he lifted the prenup again, held it to the light like it might reveal something hidden, but nothing changed. The paper remained just that, paper. Then he spoke. It appears this agreement was never filed. His tone wasn't surprised. It was conclusive, as if the decision had already started forming behind his eye. Robert sat still, but his leg betrayed him, bouncing now, rapid and uneven. Karen, on the other hand, rose when called, slowly, her hands trembling just slightly, but when she adjusted the microphone and began to speak, her voice, thin at first, began to carry. We were 2 paychecks away from eviction, she began. I worked mornings at a diner, nights at a temp agency. I bought the domain. I found the accountant. I wasn't behind the scenes, I was the scene. She didn't look at Robert. She didn't need to. Tamika followed up with email records from 2013. Karen had personally contacted investors. She pitched them. She followed up. She was essential, and the paper trail proved it. Next came photos, grainy but undeniable. Karen at launch events. Karen behind booths at trade shows. Karen handing out flyers beneath a Field Solutions banner with tired eyes and hope in her smile. Then bank records. Transfers from their joint account to fund business expenses. Before revenue existed. Before Robert even had a business account. The courtroom leaned forward. If this story resonates with you, if you've ever been written out of your own success, don't stay silent. Hit the subscribe button, leave a comment below, and share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Because stories like this, they change lives. And Karen's was just getting started. Tamika called the next witness. Yvette, Karen's older sister. She walked to the stand with slow, careful steps, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Her voice was soft, but her words were razor sharp. My sister gave up everything for him, she said. She turned down scholarships, jobs, grad school. She took care of his parents when they were sick. She handled the business, the bills, the stress. And when he began pulling away, she thought it was just a rough patch. She believed in him, until he erased her. Her voice trembled, but it never broke. Across the room, Robert shifted in his seat. He no longer looked bored. He looked exposed. Then it was the defense's turn. Field Solutions CFO took the stand. A man in his 40s, polished and prepared. Karen may have been involved early on, he said, but she was never in board meetings, never on formal correspondence. She wasn't listed as an employee or partner. It was meant to be the final word. But Tamika was ready. She pulled out Exhibit 27, a meeting agenda. From bottom corner, scrawled notes, bullet points. Beside them, the initials KF, verified by a handwriting expert. The CFO's face changed. Tamika's tone didn't. Sometimes the most important people in the room aren't on the guest list, she said, eyes locked on the judge. And one by one, Robert's defenses began to fall apart. His narrative, crafted for years to center himself, was unraveling thread by thread. What he once called stability, Karen had carried on her back. And now the court saw it too. Robert's eyes darted between his lawyer and the judge, but no one was reaching out to save him. His knee bounced faster now, uncontrolled, like a ticking clock counting down to a verdict he no longer believed he could escape. Tamika reached into her briefcase one final time. From a clear plastic sleeve she pulled a single page. This, she said, placing it carefully in front of the judge, is a certified letter from the Kings County Clerk's office. It confirms no record exists of this prenuptial agreement, not in 20. Judge Halverson lifted the document, scanning it slowly. The room held its breath. Then he nodded. There is no record, he repeated aloud, his voice calm but resolute. Additionally, this document lacks notarization. It has no witness signature. By every legal measure, it is unenforceable. A murmur rippled through the courtroom like a wave hitting a wall. Robert leaned forward, blinking hard. Your Honor, his lawyer began quickly. This must be a clerical error. We have the signed document. The judge didn't flinch. The county confirms no filing, no witness, no notary, he replied. Intent does not override the law. Martin opened his mouth again, but nothing came out. And then Robert broke. He slammed his hand against the table. Come on, he snapped. This isn't fair. She didn't build that company. I did. She handled emails. She supported me. That's it. His voice rang out like a tantrum, echoing off courtroom walls built to withstand so much more. But the judge didn't raise his voice. He only said one word. Enough. Sharp. Final. And in that silence, everything changed. Enough. The word hit the air like a gavel. Not the judge's gavel, but something deeper. A judgment that came from beyond just laws and filings. From truth. Enough. Judge Halverson repeated. His voice didn't need volume. It carried weight. The courtroom froze. No movement. No whispers. No more rebuttals. Just silence. And then finally, came the words that mattered most. Based on the evidence, the judge began, including financial records, testimony, and the failure to execute and file the prenuptial agreement. This court finds in favor of the respondent, Mrs. Karen Fields. It was official. There were no gasps, no cheers, only stillness. The kind of stillness that comes when something long overdue finally arrives. Robert didn't blink. He sat frozen, as though his brain was still buffering, reloading an ending he never thought possible. The business known as Field Solutions, the judge continued, along with the marital home and the majority of shared assets, shall be awarded to Mrs. Fields. Mr. Fields will retain one vehicle and a portion of joint savings, divided equitably. Still, Robert didn't move. The courtroom remained silent. Tamika closed her folder, calm as ever. Karen's face didn't shift. No tears, no smiles, just breath. A slow, steady inhale, the first full one she'd taken all day. Her hands, once clenched under the table, were now open, unshaking, unafraid. Robert sat as if trying to calculate what just happened. But there was no math to solve this. There was only reality. And in that reality, Karen had just reclaimed everything. Then, for the first time that day, he looked directly at Karen. Not past her, not through her, at her. You may be seated, Mrs. Fields. With that, the gavel finally dropped. The case was closed. Chairs scraped quietly. Papers were shuffled. But Karen didn't rush. She didn't move like someone trying to escape. She simply stood, calm and composed, her breath steady. Across from her, Robert remained frozen, his eyes locked on the empty spot where the prenup used to sit, as if staring at the ashes of a plan that had gone up in smoke. His lawyer leaned in, whispered something. Still, Robert didn't respond. The confidence had drained from his face. His shoulders sagged. His hands lay flat on the table. There was nothing left to say. No more leverage. No more illusion. And Karen, she picked up her bag, the same worn leather one she had carried to every investor meeting, every late-night grocery run, every hospital visit when Robert's parents were sick. That bag had been with her through everything. She didn't look at Robert as she walked past him, not out of cruelty, out of clarity, because there was nothing left to look at. No apology, no explanation, no more pretending. She walked through the courtroom doors and into the Brooklyn daylight. No tears, no smile, just something different about the way she moved. Her shoulders didn't curve inward anymore. Her spine stood tall. Her silence no longer came from fear. It came from power. Because sometimes the greatest revenge is not revenge at all. It's reclaiming what was yours all along. She didn't cry. She didn't smile. But something had shifted. The courtroom behind her, once a place where her voice had been lost in legal terms and power plays, now stood as the setting where she reclaimed not just assets, but identity. For 10 years, she had been the ghost behind the brand, the woman behind the empire, the stability behind someone else's dream. Now she was the story. Sometimes justice doesn't roar. Sometimes it doesn't wear a cape or flash a headline. Sometimes it whispers, quiet, through a woman refusing to disappear. And sometimes it comes in the form of a judge, who actually reads the fine print. As Karen stepped onto the sidewalk, the city noise wrapped around her, not to drown her out but to remind her she was back in the world. Her story wasn't over. It had just begun. Some say revenge is sweet, but Karen didn't need revenge. She had truth. She had proof. And now she had peace. Now it's your turn. What do you think? Was justice served? Have you ever trusted someone who later tried to erase you from your own? Drop your thoughts in the comments. We read them all,
And if this story moved you, or made you reflect on your own journey, subscribe right now so you don't miss our next powerful video. Because next time we're diving into what happened when a billionaire fired a hotel maid, just for answering the phone in Dutch. And it changed everything. You won't believe how that ended. Back in that courtroom, the memory of Robert's laugh still lingered. The arrogant, knowing laugh of a man convinced he had outplayed everyone. That laugh was gone now. In its place, silence, confusion, stillness. He remained seated long after the others had left, staring at the table like it could offer him an answer. The prenup, the very thing he believed would shield him, had turned to dust under the scrutiny of truth. It had never been legally real, and now, neither was his control. He had prepared for every scenario except this one. Karen winning. There was no final confrontation, no dramatic argument in the hallway. Karen didn't gloat, didn't turn around for one last word. She simply walked out like someone who no longer owed anyone an explanation. For years, Robert had told himself he was the architect of their success, that he built the empire alone. But the truth is, he just had the louder voice. Karen had done the real building, with sacrifice, with silence, with resilience. And while Robert signed documents to secure power, Karen carried the weight of their future, without ever asking to be seen, until the day came when she demanded to be, not with shouting, not with anger, with evidence, with facts, with truth. And in the end, the court didn't need drama, it needed clarity, and that clarity was finally hers. Outside, the streets of Brooklyn moved as if nothing had changed, but for Karen everything had. The noise of the city didn't overwhelm her, it grounded. She had walked these same blocks years earlier, rushing to jobs that barely paid, juggling receipts, carrying groceries in both hands, while texting vendors with her thumbs. Back then she moved with urgency, now she moved with ownership. This wasn't just about winning a case, it was about rewriting the narrative. For years, her love had been her silence. She thought that staying quiet was a form of loyalty, that holding everything together without recognition was strength. But real strength, it's speaking when your voice shakes, it's standing in court when your knees are weak, it's remembering who you are, even when someone tries to rewrite you out of your own history. She passed a coffee shop where they used to sit after long nights building the business. She used to listen to Robert talk about legacy. Now she understood. His version of legacy never included her name, but hers, it would. Karen didn't need credit anymore. She didn't need his approval, or a title, or permission to exist at the center of the story she helped build. She already had what mattered: truth, freedom.
A spine that no longer bent to keep someone else standing tall. For the first time in years, she wasn't walking behind anyone, she was leading, and every step forward was hers alone. Weeks later, Karen stood in what used to be Robert's office. Now it was hers. Same desk, same skyline view. But the energy had shifted. The air no longer carried arrogance. It carried intention. The silence wasn't heavy. It was empowering. She ran her fingers over the polished surface of the desk, not out of nostalgia, but to mark the beginning of a new era, one where she was no longer a ghost in someone else's empire. She was the architect of her own. She rehired 2 employees Robert had once let go without explanation. She gave them raises. She brought back her original spreadsheet templates, the same ones he once laughed at, and streamlined the company's systems in a week. Clients noticed. Investors noticed. Because when real leadership walks into a room, it doesn't need to announce itself. It builds quietly, efficiently, authentically. Karen didn't seek revenge. She sought restoration. And she got it. But more than the assets, more than the control of the company or the house or the accounts, she got something far more valuable: herself. Not the version that tiptoed around ego, not the one who edited herself for the sake of peace, the real one, the one who had been there all along, building, sacrificing, believing. She smiled, not because she'd won, but because she'd come home to herself. And this time no one could write her out of the story. Karen didn't need applause. She didn't need headlines. What she needed was exactly what she walked away with: peace. In a world that often rewards the loudest voice, she had proven something far greater: that truth, when protected and presented with grace, has its own volume. There are many women like Karen, people who build in the shadows, who give their time, their love,
their labor, without asking for anything but loyalty in return, who are told again and again that what they've done doesn't count because it wasn't written down, notarized, filed. But sometimes all it takes is one moment, one crack in the mask, one voice finally rising. Karen didn't just win a court case, she reclaimed her name, her story, her legacy. And somewhere in a quiet corner of Brooklyn, a new woman is building something of her own, because she watched Karen do it first. If this story resonated with you, don't keep it to yourself, share it. Let someone else see what justice looks like when it walks in silence, but leaves a mark loud enough to echo, because power isn't always about position. Sometimes it's about knowing who you are and refusing to let anyone else define it for you.